Hey, I'm JP Sears. Question for you. Would you believe that the most critically judgmental person that you'll encounter throughout your whole life would be your own self? If you buy into that, would it be okay with you if you and I explore how to free yourself from self-judgment? My opinion is that we're all judgmental. We're always going to be judging ourselves. The question is, how do we react to our own self-judgment? Do we judge our self-judgment to be a bad thing? And do we judge the judgment we have about our self-judgment to be a bad thing? Do we start to get lost in 2 or 3 or 4 layers of self-judgment, creating constriction and binding of us? If so, how can we find the freedom to not be a slave to our own self-judgment? I'm guessing we will never make our self-judgment go away. The question is how to find a peaceful relationship to the self-judging part of us. If we freeze in reaction to our self-judgment, then what happens is our life can start to become very constricted, where we don't pursue new opportunities, we don't expand our comfort zone, we don't get into newer, deeper, more meaningful relationships, because we shape our life out of an attempt to avoid the critical self-judgment. Another way I'd ask you to consider about how we become confined, become a prisoner of our own self-judging self, would be in reaction to our self-judgment. Instead of freezing, we start fighting it. We start rebelling the self-judgment. And while that seems like a good, strong thing to do, before too long we can actually wake up and realize, out of part of me fighting the self-judging critical voice that another part of me generates, my life is shaped out of rebellion to the critical voice, which means the critical voice is absolutely controlling the way I navigate my life. So what can you and I do to invite some grace and freedom to displace some of the confinement from our critical judgmental voice of self? Well, first consideration, let part of you judge yourself. We actually want to avoid the trap of judging our judgmental self. When I judge my judgmental critical part to be bad, dysfunctional, there's a decent chance that my life just has a deeper volume of judgment. And instead of focusing on what I want to enjoy and explore and become curious about in life, I'm devoting my life force energy to combating my judgmental self with more judgment. The second consideration would be we get really curious about the critical force inside of our own head. So we notice the critical judgments and we look at those as a symptom, and we get curious about what's behind this critical voice. I think I'd like to write a book. So you want to write a book? That is ridiculous. There are people out there who are far more experienced than you, way more knowledgeable. Your nostrils are too big, you don't have enough experience. Why don't you save yourself the time, effort, and embarrassment and leave it to the professionals? I'd like to ask you a question if I could. Underneath your critical judgments of me, what are you feeling? What do I feel? I guess I feel afraid. What do you think you're afraid of? I guess I'm afraid to feel inadequate. So are you telling me that the reason why you're projecting harsh, critical judgments towards me is because you're afraid you might feel inadequate if I put myself out there by writing a book? Yeah, I guess that's the message. I appreciate you sharing with me how you really feel. Thank you for understanding. The critical voice almost becomes the bully in the schoolyard. It doesn't know how to be vulnerable and say, man, I don't like who I am. I don't feel like I really matter in this world. That might be the energy inside the bully, but the bully expresses it through belittling others, becoming the critical one on the playground. Could it be true that the compassionate greeting is what will heal the judgmental part of us, rather than forceful judgment trying to beat up the schoolyard bully that lives inside of us. Another strategy I'd invite you to test drive is when you hear the critical voice of your own self, ask yourself, whose voice is this echoing? If it was someone from your past, mother, father, teacher, coach, sibling, if this critical voice is actually a replica of someone else's voice that you carry inside your own head, whose voice does it most closely replicate? If you can connect with the possibility there, I would absolutely invite you to explore unresolved aspects of your relationship with that person. Here's the weird question for you. If you didn't have the critical judgmental voice inside your own head, how else would you be paying attention to yourself? So I would ask you to consider, how else can you actively, proactively pay attention to yourself? If it's not critically, how can you do it nurturingly? The emotional parts of our heart might just say the only thing more terrifying than being treated with critical attention would be to have no attention at all. So if critical attention is all you have to give me, I'll take it. Thank you for joining me to consider how you can find more freedom from your self-judgment. I'd certainly invite you to share this video with your friends, like the video, subscribe to my channel. If you do that, I'll judge you to be a cooler person.